Okay, let's check out some reference now. Starting with the boats. You know what's interesting about this? The flame actually lasts for quite a bit right there. So maybe we want to do something like that. Also notice how yellow that actually is and how saturated those colors are. That's actually pretty darn saturated, and that could be due to the camera, but you'll notice that our flames are also really saturated right here. That's a very yellow. And also, the fire and the flame doesn't last very long. It's literally 1, 2, 3, like 10 frames, 10 or 11 frames, and then we basically have smoke. So, one thing that we might need to adjust is how long flame lasts. It's really just there for a split second. That's obviously in slow motion, but, you know, right there, just a quick flash. And most of what we see with the missile is going to be smoke. Let's go ahead and look at a still frame now of this guy. We do have a lot of motion blur, and fortunately, motion blur is working with Karma. So that's going to be nice. But we have a lot of crunchy details right here. We don't have a whole lot of glow. I mean, we have a decent amount, but it's not anything crazy. The smoke is fairly, I should say, thick, or it's laying on top. It's not actually scattering as much as you might think. So maybe that means turn up the shadow density a bit more. If we take a look at areas like this, the glow is pretty subtle for the most part. And that's really mostly what we have. So back at the shader. First thing I'll do is I'll turn up density. Let's restart this render. The density scale here, I'm going to start by doubling that at 150. And as I do this, I'm going to pull up our reference. And notice how in the reference here, the smoke almost has a velvet feel to it. It almost looks soft to the touch. That's, in my opinion, a pretty good place to be in general for pyro plumes. And so, let's turn off the scatter and fire as we do this. You want to only pay attention to density first, and then add the other two in after that. And I'll also go for more of a side angle along here, so that we can better see what this is like in normal lighting. So, as this clears up, this is pretty darn good for the most part. We do have some motion blur happening right here, so that's why this is blurry. But I do think that a value of around 150 is not too bad. I also find that it's nice to use a ramp. And what we can do is take our lower density values and push them even lower. So if we go something like this, what that will do is add that velvety look that we see right here. Notice how it's kind of soft, but we still maintain a thick looking cloud for the most part. As a matter of fact, because we just did that, we can take this up probably to about 200 now. And that will be a nice combination of settings. The cool thing about doing this as well is that when we add the fire and the glow in, the areas of high density are going to shadow that, and we're still going to get the softness on the outside of the smoke. So it's the best of both worlds. So again, my advice is to use the density ramp because that adds a nice soft feel to everything. Okay, once we have that, let's try enabling the scatter. One thing we'll notice is that the scatter is primarily what we see during the explosion. So as we go forward here, look at that. Most of everything we're seeing here is going to be found in the scatter. And this depends on the explosion. That would not be true for this kind of thing right here. That would be more of the actual flame field showing through. But for a heavy pyroclastic plume, which would be something like this, most of that flame area is, again, just that ball of flame. Let's go over here to some of my favorite reference, and we'll see that, again, a lot of that is kind of the glowy stuff showing through. So we do want to be pretty intense on that. And also notice how the flame only lasts for a few seconds, if that. Not even a few seconds. It lasts for maybe like 10 to 20 frames. It's not a whole lot. So what we'll first of all do is we will go to our large plume here and make sure that you are cutting off the flame. This is the noise that we're putting into our flame. Again, just as a reminder, I have a ramp here that's multiplying that flame field down to 0. I set it so that the keyframe here ends at 61, but I'm going to move that up to maybe, again, about 10 to 20 frames. So starting at frame 30, that would be probably about frame 45 or so when that all disappears. So really fast. Okay. Now, let's go back to our stage. Maybe let's say frame 34 as a good reference, okay? So there's a stage. Let's restart our render. All right. We want to be pretty intense with this. So, and this is also very saturated. So let's start off by tinting with a smoke color. If we do that and turn up the tint strength, that's going to saturate all of these colors, which is really good. We can also enable color correction, and this probably has one of the biggest impacts on the visual look of your scatter. So if I turn the gamma down, notice what that does. Makes a huge difference, as well as the gain. If I take that down, it's going to add more of the smoke along here. I also like turning off the mask center and mask width expressions here. And what I actually found, by the way, is that the mask center and mask width look at the incoming density values, not the multiplied density values that we had right here when we bring it up with the density scale. So I was actually wrong in telling you that it works off of the multiply values. We do, in fact, want this to be about 0.5 or 0.15 and about 0.5. So we'll do that. If we turn up the attenuation, that's going to bring everything closer towards the center. If we overdrive this, that's also going to really bring out more of that surface smoke, which is nice. You want the smoke laying on top. And so I like taking up the attenuation quite a bit. You can bring the gamma down. You can bring the gain down to make the smoke lie on top even more. And from here, we can just mess around with the hot core scale if we want to. We can go crazy with that. You know, it's controversial of whether or not you want these values to clip. We do, in fact, see clipped values in reference. And in my opinion, I think it's okay to clip a little bit yourself. So we have that going on. And I think that about does it right there for the scatter. Now, one thing that you might want to take a look at here, let's go ahead and pause this, is if we go back to the object level and we go down to our scatter field, notice how this is a vector 3 volume. So this is holding color inside of that scatter field. So let's go back to our pyrobake volume real fast. And instead of going with this orange color, let's bring this more towards yellow. I'm also going to go down here on the ramp where it gets darker and set this to a red. So that is going to start at more of this orangey kind of yellow color and go down into red as things get cooler. All right, on the stage now, let's go ahead and see what that looks like. So we will hit Karma again. And wow, that red is really showing through. Let's go ahead and actually pause the render real quick. And that really shows you how much of an impact those lower, darker values have. Let's go back and forth here now. Object level, we don't want it that red. So we will bring that probably like around here, something like this. Just a slight bit more red than it was before. We can actually just get rid of that ticker, add it back, and then add a bit of red. So we'll just go like that, but not too crazy. Okay, so as soon as we have that, let's also bring this over like so, and try that again. So restart and auto update. Okay, there we go. I think something like this is much better. If we look back at the reference right here, that looks to be about what's going on. Maybe a bit more saturated on that yellow. What we can do to achieve that is we can simply turn down this hot core scale to maybe a value of 5,000, right around here. And that's pretty darn good. Okay, cool. Now at this point, I'm going to send off a test render for a few frames because I want to see how the animation is sitting. I want to see what the glow is doing. I want to make sure that we're building upon something that's working. So back to the GL real quick. We need a camera to get this working. So under the LOP lights and camera, I'm going to zoom in right around here, control click this camera, and that will create a camera down there. Let's go ahead and set up this whole thing like so. And if we go through the camera, we end up with this. Just to double check that, let's go ahead and restart Karma. And there we go. Maybe go right around here, give it some room to go up. And then on our Karma render settings, I'm going to set our pixel samples to 4 and our max ray samples to 4 as well. And we're going to render between 30 and 60 frames, or between frames 30 and 60, that is. So let's render that to MPlay.